US President Donald Trump has just signaled that he's ready and willing to bomb Iran into oblivion. Trump is furious that Iran has refused his push for a new nuclear deal. Combine that with Iran's funding of the Houthis, who cause havoc in the Red Sea, and Trump's message now is clearer than ever. Enough is enough. The US is gearing up for a full-blown war against Iran, but Iran believes it can fire back. It says that it's ready for anything that the US can throw at it. The latest escalation in the conflict between the US and Iran began on March 30 when Trump held a telephone interview with NBC News. During that interview, Trump mentioned several actions that the US may be planning to take, including implementing secondary tariffs against countries that continue to buy oil from Russia. Those tariffs would punish the purchasing countries themselves, with Trump suggesting tariffs of between 25 and 50%. But those tariffs weren't the headline of the conversation. The biggest talking point, at least in the context of the US and its active military operation, was Iran. Trump suggested that his administration was talking with Iranian officials about the prospect of creating a new nuclear deal. He also highlighted what will happen if Iran doesn't follow through. If they don't make a deal, they'll be bombing, Trump told NBC. But there's a chance that if they don't make a deal, that I'll do secondary tariffs on them like I did 4 years ago. Trump is referring to what he did during his first stint as president. Back then, it was Trump pulling the US out of a nuclear deal with Iran that he felt was disadvantageous to American interests. That deal saw the US, along with several other world powers, place massive restrictions on Iran's nuclear capabilities in exchange for sanctions relief. Trump went in the opposite direction. After withdrawing the US from the deal, he implemented sweeping sanctions against Iran. According to Crisis Group, those sanctions came in 2 major tranches. The first, implemented in August 2018, hit Iran's non-oil producing industries. The second, and far more significant tranche, targeted 700 individuals and entities, including 300 that had never been targeted before, to punish them with trade restrictions. All told, the sanctions target around 80% of Iran's economy, and they've been effective, says Crisis Group. Iran's currency has dropped in value by 2/3, and its oil exports have fallen from 2.5 million barrels per day to around 500,000 barrels. At the time of writing, a single barrel of oil cost around $73. So, before Trump implemented sanctions during his first term, Iran was making $182.5 million per day from its oil for an annual total of $66.61 billion. Now, it's making $36.5 million per day and just $13.322 billion. That's a loss of around $53.3 billion per year. It's clear that Trump now sees secondary sanctions, which allow him to punish Iran's clients for doing business with it after the US has maximized its ability to hit Iran directly, as a way to force a nuclear negotiation. And if Iran still resists, then there will only be one recourse: bombing the country into oblivion. So, what is Trump planning to do? And just as importantly, how will Iran respond, especially given its nuclear background? Earlier, we mentioned that the US and Iran were previously signatories on a deal designed to limit Iran's ability to build nuclear weapons in exchange for sanctions relief. That deal was called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, and was signed in 2015. At the time, the JCPOA was considered a landmark accord between Iran and many of the global powers that the country's actions threatened. Proponents of the deal said it would block Iran's goal of being able to use nuclear weapons to become the major power broker in the Middle East, and the only trade-off would be the relief of economic sanctions that delivered some extra money into Iran's coffers. Given that Iran competes with economic heavyweights like Saudi Arabia for Middle Eastern influence, it was seen as a good trade-off. The sanctions relief wouldn't place Iran into such a strong economic position that it could truly challenge the Middle Eastern balance financially. Plus, it wouldn't be able to threaten any other country with the nuclear weapons it was trying to develop. Several major nations signed the JCPOA. In addition to the US, China, Russia, France, and the UK, all put pen to paper. Germany, signing on behalf of the European Union, or EU, also agreed to the deal. There was some consternation at the time. For instance, Saudi Arabia wasn't happy that it wasn't consulted, especially given that it's one of the countries most at threat from Iran. Israel, another of Iran's major Middle East opponents, rejected the JCPOA outright because it believed the entire deal was far too lenient on a nation that both directly threatens Israel and funds proxies such as Hamas that attack Israel. The deal also included sunset provisions. For instance, After a decade from January 2016, the deal's restrictions on centrifuge restrictions would be lifted, allowing Iran to develop and use these vital nuclear components again. After 15 years, limitations on the amount of enriched uranium Iran produced would also be lifted. It seems like the JCPOA's overriding goal was to demonstrate how beneficial it would be to Iran if it became part of the wider geopolitical environment ahead of threatening its neighboring countries. Donald Trump came along about 2 years after the JCPOA was signed and pulled the US out. The major ramification of that move is that it appeared to trigger the Iranian decision to start violating the JCPOA. Iran Watch offers a useful timeline of the events that followed. In July 2019, about 2 years after the US pulled out, Iran started enriching uranium above the 3.67% uranium-235 or U-235 limit the accord set, reaching 4.5% that month. That's important because weapons-grade uranium is highly enriched to over 90% U-235, according to the World Nuclear Association. However, a nuke can be made with uranium enriched to the point where it contains just 20% U-235. Iran still wasn't close to building a nuclear weapon, but the fact that its U-235 production was on the rise, breaking the conditions of its nuclear deal, was a cause for concern. More violations soon followed. Iran started exceeding more caps and expanded its centrifuge production beyond the limits placed on it by the JCPOA. It also reopened uranium production facilities and began enriching uranium to the level of 20% U-235 in January 2021, high enough to create a small nuclear device. The number was up to 60% by April of the same year, and Iran's slow-moving nuclear program appeared to be back up and running again. A combination of the US leaving the deal and both Russia and China, the other two nations backing JCPOA, aligning themselves closer to Iran, almost left the accord in tatters. Only France and the UK really remained, and they were the two weakest signatories in the nuclear context. Iran still has a lot of work to do if it wants to build a nuclear weapon. However, its alliance with Russia, to which it sent at least 8,060 Shahed drones since the start of the Ukraine conflict, helps there. So does its decision to break the centrifuge aspect of the JCPOA. If Iran can get 3,000 of its centrifuges up and running, it may only take a few months for it to enrich enough uranium for a nuclear device. That's a clear problem. Some may even argue that it's a problem of Trump's making. Regardless, the US is now trying to come down hard on Iran for both breaking the terms of the JCPOA and essentially making Trump look bad. Trump's response now, that he's in his second stint as president, was to send a letter to Iran during the first week of March. We don't know precisely what that letter contained. However, in an interview with Maria Bartiromo, Trump had this to say.
I've written him a letter saying, I hope you're going to negotiate, because if we have to go in militarily, it's going to be a terrible thing for them.
You wrote a letter to the Khomeini?
Yes.
When did you send the letter?
Yesterday.
And you said you better negotiate, or we want you to negotiate?
I didn't say you better. I said, I hope you're going to negotiate, because it's going to be a lot better for Iran. And I think they want to get that letter. The other alternative is we have to do something, because you can't let them have a nuclear weapon.
Strange phrasing aside, Trump's essentially saying that he told Iran that it was time to make a deal with the US, one that would likely sit outside of the JCPOA that still exists in its weakened form. Therein lies a problem. Iran claims that Trump's letter arrived on March 12 and that it was going to refuse to enter negotiations with the US. The country's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, said, "We don't avoid talks. It's a breach of promises that has caused issues for us so far. They must prove that they can build trust." In other words, Trump broke Iran's first deal with the US during his first term as president. What's to say he wouldn't break the terms of a second deal, or that Iran could even trust him to implement a deal that's fair to the country? That outright rejection of Trump's letter leads us to where we are today. Trump is now threatening Iran with bombing unless it comes to the table. So what is Trump doing to get ready for that bombing campaign? It appears that he may have already started. On March 16, reports came in that Trump had launched a bombing campaign in Yemen. The country has been predominantly controlled by the Houthi militant group for several years, with Trump's initial strikes killing 53 people, including 5 children, according to the Houthis. Trump's goal appears to be to decapitate the Houthis by taking out the group's leaders and key military installations. More strikes have followed since March 16 and at a practically daily rate, with one of the more recent ones coming on March 28 and decimating 40 locations across Yemen. What does that have to do with bombing Iran? To many, the Houthis and Iran are one and the same. As the BBC explained, the Houthis seized much of western Yemen in 2015 and have been expanding ever since with Iran's help. The US claims that Iran provides weapons and training to the Houthi militants. That aid helped the Houthis begin their campaign of assaulting and capturing commercial shipping vessels in the Red Sea, which began toward the end of 2023. The Houthis claimed these attacks are in support of Hamas, which is fighting against Israel and is also believed to be supported by Iran. Both the US and Saudi Arabia say that Iran has smuggled tons of weapons, ranging from ballistic and cruise missiles to drones, to the Houthis since the start of Yemen's civil war. Those weapons have been used to attack Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, in addition to Red Sea vessels. In short, the Houthis seem to serve as a proxy for Iran. The group is acting in Iran's interests, helping it to accomplish its geopolitical goals without having to get its hands dirty directly. By launching an intense bombing campaign against the Houthis, Trump is already sending a warning to Iran. He's telling the country that he won't allow one of its proxy groups to have its own way in the Red Sea. Plus, by taking out the Houthi power base, he's trying to limit Iran's influence in Yemen. Plus, Iran is getting a front row seat to the devastating combined firepower of the US Navy and US Air Force, meaning there's no small element of intimidation at play in Trump's strikes against the Houthis. The message is simple: this is happening to one of your proxies, and it could happen to you next. That warning sees fire rain down from the skies onto Iranian allies. However, there are also less direct signs that Trump is preparing for a bombing campaign that focuses on Iran. One of the biggest being that Trump is sending B-2 Spirit bombers to an island that's within bombing distance of Iran. On March 26, the UK Defence Journal reported that the US has moved at least 7 of its B-2A Spirit stealth bombers to a remote island named Diego Garcia. That island, which the UK operates, is nestled in the Indian Ocean and is around 3,000 miles from Iran. That's far enough away to protect the bombers from the Shahab-3 family of Iranian missiles, which have ranges of about 1,200 miles. With the addition of US aerial refueling aircraft to the island, the B-2As have all they need to fly to Iran, drop bombs, and fly back so they're out of range of an Iranian counterattack. The same island was host to B-52 and B-1 bombers during the Gulf War and America's operations in Iraq and Afghanistan in the wake of the September 11, 2001 attacks on the World Trade Center. That means it's a proven base that has long served the US as a means to project power across the Middle East. Now, that's precisely what Trump is doing by stationing B-2As on the island. And if a March 20 report from the War Zone, or TWZ, is anything to go by, the B-2As are just the start. TWZ says that a sizable contingent of F-35A Joint Strike Fighters from Hill Air Force Base in Utah have arrived in England. All told, 12 of the US most advanced fighter jets touched down at RAF Lakenheath Air Base, which has previously served as a way station for the US when transporting planes to the Middle East. Are those F-35s heading to Diego Garcia too? Are they going to another base near Iran, such as any of the others that the US operates in Saudi Arabia? We don't know the answer yet, but it's clear that Trump is showcasing his country's aerial might, both actively against the Houthis and indirectly through bomber and fighter positioning, to deliver a threat to Iran. Come to the table or the US will destroy Iran. There's just one problem: Iran isn't backing down. In addition to its earlier outright rejection of the letter Trump sent to Iran, the country has replied to the US president's most recent threats about bombing it. The Tehran Times says that Iran has readied large numbers of missiles, all of which are located in underground facilities that it'll use to withstand any airstrikes Trump orders against the country. Those missiles will play a key role in Iran's defense, as will the country's underground tunnels. It's unknown just how many of these underground bases exist in Iran. However, March 25 brought with it a demonstration of what's likely the most impressive, at least in terms of size, a base that commentators have dubbed Missile City. TWZ says that an 85-second video shared by Iran shows just how deep this base runs. The chief of Iran's armed forces, Major General Mohammed Hossein Bagheri, drives through the facility to essentially offer a tour of what it contains. We see several Iranian missiles, including the Pavel land attack cruise missile and multiple Sajals, K-bar Shakens and Hajj Qasems. Iran has used all of these missiles in the past to attack Israel, with a video implying that they're all primed and ready to be fired at any bombers the US sends towards its territory. However, TWC says that the video isn't as threatening as Iran hoped it would be. The tour shows several glaring vulnerabilities, including a complete lack of blast doors that separate the different ammunition stores inside Missile City. That's a problem. A precise airstrike by the US could set off a chain reaction of underground explosions as Iranian missiles go up in flames, followed by igniting other missiles that aren't secured. Interestingly, TWZ reports that similar videos showcasing Iran's other underground missile bases have shown blast doors in operation previously. Either Iran hasn't built them in Missile City, it's hiding them, or it hasn't finished construction yet. Whatever the case may be, the US will take that as a sign that Iran isn't as ready to repel a US bombing campaign as it believes itself to be. Iran, on the other hand, is trying to claim that it's prepared for a fight with the United States. But is that true? In a straight fight against the US, Iran should come second every single time. According to Global Firepower, which ranks 145 military nations annually based on over 60 factors, Iran has the world's 16th strongest military. The US is number 1. Iran's active military of 610,000 personnel and 350,000 reserves doesn't stack up to the 1.328 million active personnel in the US military. That's before we consider the 799,500 soldiers the US has in reserve. In every category that matters, Iran loses. It has 551 aircraft to the US's 13,043. The US has more tanks, over 326,000 more armoured vehicles, and a navy with around 4 times the assets of Iran's and with far greater displacement tonnage. In other words, the US has more and bigger ships, as demonstrated by its 11 aircraft carriers to Iran's 0. However, Trump isn't promising all-out war. He's saying that the US will bomb Iran. That's where things get a little more complicated. The US can bomb the Houthis so successfully because that militant group has minimal, if any, air defences. It mostly uses drones and cruise missiles to attack ships in the Red Sea, meaning it can't do much to stop bombing strikes. That isn't the case for Iran. As Al Jazeera reported in April 2024, Iran spends a huge portion of its military budget on building missiles and shoring up its air defences. It has to. Sanctions placed against the nation have prevented it from updating its aging air force. The country is still using US-made F-4 and F-5 fighter jets, which are leagues behind anything the US brings to the table today. But on the air defense front, Iran has several domestic and imported systems it uses to create a layered defense against incoming missiles and bombs. The highlight of that multi-layered defense is the Bavar 373. Similar in structure to Russia's S-300, though closer in operation to the S-400 according to Iran. The Bavar 373 can reportedly lock onto 60 targets simultaneously at a maximum range of 248 miles. It can only fire on 6 of those 60 targets and will hit them at a range of 186 miles or less. However, that's where Iran's other missile defences come into play. Sitting behind these types of mid-range systems are the likes of the tactical Sayad, Arman and Khordad 15. They can hit incoming threats from up to 124 miles away, though all at different ranges. The Arman is also portable, allowing Iran to position it close to bases it believes the US might target with bombs. Iran's multi-layered system could allow it to use the Bavar 373 to track incoming missiles, with its other systems being the ones that take out the bulk. Iran believes those systems would be enough to repel an incoming Israeli missile strike. But will they work against US bombers and fighter jets? We may soon get an answer to that question if Iran refuses to enter nuclear weapons negotiations with the US and Donald Trump. Right now, the Middle East is a powder keg that's just waiting to explode. Will Trump or Iran set it off? Let us know what you think in the comments below, along with telling us if you think the US could bomb Iran into oblivion. Will Iran defend itself? What role would its proxies play in a wider conflict? Share your opinions below and subscribe to The Military Show for more commentary on the latest developments in the Middle East, as well as news and commentary on conflicts from around the globe. We're an independent source for unbiased information surrounding conflicts from around the globe, and we truly appreciate your support.